Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would chat with you guys a little bit about back training. I get a lot of people who they see my back, realize my age and that my back development's actually pretty dang good, and they'll ask me, what do I do for my back? But then when a lot of people watch the things I do, they don't like it. And they'll often say, well, I feel like your form is too loose on this or that, or I feel like you're not doing the correct range of motion. And they'll say these things, but by that same token, my back development tends to be, again, pretty dang good. And I think what people need to remember when it comes to back training, there are a lot of ideas, there's a lot of philosophies. But if you look at just the results most people get, you look at the data on it, and you realize that, number one, lengthened positions do tend to create the most potential for hypertrophy. I'm not saying they're everything. But the data is getting pretty solid on that they again, biggest chunk of your muscle growth probably comes from the more lengthened positions, at least the potential. And I'm not saying you can't do it in other areas. Mechanical tension, also the biggest factor. But mechanical tension is created by workload, created by joint angles, things like that. So when you really start looking at, say, the way I usually train my back, one of the things you'll notice, even though sometimes my elbows and stuff, people are like, well, your elbows don't look locked. It's my joints. Look at what my scapula do. So watch any of my rows. Watch what my shoulders and scapula do. Even though my form is a little loose, you'll notice I stretch at the bottom. Okay? I actively make sure my scapula spread apart on every back exercise I do. Whether it's a row like this or whether it's the pull-ups. So watch that. So notice that I focus upon using, relatively heavy weights for a large number of reps, but I always focus on stretching, right? So if you watch what all I do, I kind of hit a little bit of a stretch reflex on the pull-ups there. Of course, as I start getting fatigued, I start pausing and going to a hang. Rows are kind of the same way. Sometimes I'll pause just a little bit, get a little stretch at the bottom, trying to complete a couple more reps. But the main thing you'll notice, I really always focus on trying to get a stretch in my back, whether I'm doing a stricter movement or whether I'm doing, something with a little more body English. I always do that. I don't ever really focus on negatives or eccentric reps, okay? And I'm not saying there isn't a place for those things. I personally have never found it to be valuable for back activation, whether it's for my traps, whether it's for my lats, any of that. I've just simply never found it to be beneficial. I've never found it to give a better pump. I've never found it to make me feel the muscle more. I just haven't. And as far as squeezes go, I don't ever care about squeezes at the top because I deadlift. And I think that's another point I've raised to a lot of people. They'll try to say, and I've seen a lot of guys with really tiny backs who will still tell you, oh, the whole point is that squeeze and contraction, and they're talking about the shortened position. The data is not really that supportive of that. Number two, I've seen tons of guys obsess over that who still have no back development in the real world. And again, not saying there are not exceptions. I want to be clear. But I've seen a lot of trainers and lifters who do focus on that, tell you to focus on it, and then I'm like, you really don't have much back. Okay? But here's the thing I would say, most of us are doing some deadlifting at least. If you think in terms of that because that really is an isometric contraction, assuming it contributes to muscle growth, again, some researchers would say the evidence for that is weak, but I would say no, but I wouldn't completely discredit it. It's still a shortened position, and shortened position, it probably has some muscle fibers, a few that are only involved with that. But when you think about the isometric part, the contracted shortened position, doesn't a deadlift hit that harder than you would ever do on a row or a cable row or a dumbbell row? Right? Think in terms of, again, mechanical loading and how much tension is placed on those muscles, because we have our scapula usually pulled back. So again, our traps and our lats are pulled into a bit of a shortened position under load. Okay. But a deadlift, you're going to have way more tension there than you're ever going to have with a dumbbell. Or a cable row, it's going to be multiple times more tension. I would kind of, again, and this might be a little bro sciencey of me, it could be pseudoscientific. I would argue that if you really care about that a great deal, I wouldn't worry about it much on your dynamic movements. Let your things like deadlifts and movements like that handle it. And it doesn't have to be a conventional deadlift. It could be a Romanian deadlift. You could be doing RDLs for rep work. I think the same thing would apply there. I'm a bigger fan of conventional deadlifts. I've done RDLs and phases for reps and things. But I tend to do those for things like hamstrings and stuff, and I feel like a glute ham raise is probably slightly better. Although, if someone really had lagging hamstrings, I think we could absolutely make a case for combining an RDL and a glute ham raise. In fact, I would say for someone who really has a major hamstring weakness, that's a great combination. Okay. The other thing, though, to look at too when it comes to back development is remembering that the back is complex. We really do need a couple different angles. I do think if our goal is to really maximize back development, though, we do need to do both a rowing movement and some sort of pull-up, a vertical and a horizontal pull. Now, I don't think pull-ups are necessary for everyone. A lot of people, pull-ups and weighted pull-ups might be beyond their strength level. In which case, all right, fine, a lat pull down or a machine is perfectly acceptable. At the end of the day, tension is tension. I do like the bigger movements. Okay, I do like the idea of them. I do like basic movements more, and I generally am going to push in the direction of those in many cases. But at the same time, we have to admit tension is tension. I was just saying earlier, it's all about mechanical tension on the muscles. And again, if we're going to be objective and we're going to be honest, does a lat pull down or a machine pull down or whatever put tension on the back? Yes, of course it does. Does it put tension on those lats? Yes. Can it get us into those lengthened positions? Yes. But I also think that a nice wide grip pull-up is an absolute beast for that. Okay, it is an absolute beast for that, particularly for lats. And it doesn't say other stuff. Doesn't mean other stuff doesn't work. I just like what it brings to the table. Plus, I in general like things like calisthenics and weighted body weight exercises. Again, squats and deadlifts count. But I do want to highlight the point that really the take-home is irrespective of what approach you're trying to use, to whether you think you need to be stricter with form, looser with form, whatever you're doing. I would say the real thing to think about is making sure you're fatiguing into those stretch positions. Make sure vertical and horizontal pulls, you are spreading your scapula apart, right, so that we get a stretch in those muscles. And I think it is generally, if you're trying to really maximize back development, I do think it is a very good idea to include both a vertical and a horizontal pull because of the different emphasis on different muscles through the back. Because the whole middle and upper back is actually a whole complex of muscles. It's not just lats. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.